Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts, Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Driving the Line, the trucking podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. You are in for an absolute treat today. I speak on behalf of the entire Driving the Line podcast team to tell you we are excited. We have a special guest that is going to be joining us on this episode and bringing a topic to our listening audience that is dear to our heart, those of us on the podcast team, an organization we are very familiar with, completely supportive of, and are just 100% behind the mission of Truckers Against Trafficking, or Trucking Against Trafficking. And our guest today is Miss Chris Moreno. Chris is a dedicated advocate against human trafficking. She specializes in educating the trucking industry by equipping transportation professionals with knowledge to identify and respond to potential trafficking situations. She's instrumental in fostering collaboration with various organizations to advance the mission of TAT. And throughout the podcast, we will use the term TAT, and just understand that is Truckers Against Trafficking. Chris is a public speaker, and she drives strategic partnerships and basically implements TAT's vision across the country. And in short, Chris is a leader in the fight against human trafficking, empowering the trucking industry to recognize and respond to this horrible, horrible, horrible crime. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast. We are so tickled to have you join us today.
Yes, thank you so much. We're excited. Well, I say we're, as a collective of TAT, that we're excited to be here and be able to talk about this issue. I think it's one most people might have an idea. So we just want to explain it thoroughly and give you guys some tips on what you can do and how transportation is involved.
Absolutely. And what we would like to do, with your permission, we've got some basic questions. It's nothing more than going to form the framework of a discussion. And even though this is your first time to be with us, the four of us on the podcast, we are very conversational in nature. We like to say it's like we're sitting around the supper or the dinner table, drinking a glass of tea, and we just visit about various topics. It doesn't mean the topic's unimportant. It just means that we like our audience to hear in a conversational nature. We think that it's more impactful to them when we do that. So I will ask you some basic questions, but any of the guys may chime in at any time. And I am joined here today and our regular listeners know who our team is, but I'm Kenny Ray. I'm one of the four guys on the Driving the Line podcast, along with my work colleagues and my very, very dear friends that I consider three brothers, Mr. Mike Bohan from Missouri, Mr. Jim Seibert, and Mr. Barry Harrison, both from the great state of Oklahoma, and I'm down in Texas. And so, Chris, let's start off. Even though those of us on the podcast team are very familiar and very supportive of Truckers Against Trafficking, we may have somebody listening to this episode that's never even heard of the organization. So start off, just give us the high-level view. What is Truckers Against Trafficking?
Sure. Truckers Against Trafficking, or what we would like to go by now as TAT, is that 501c3 organization or nonprofit. Our whole gist and our whole agenda really is to have that transportation industry or that whole profession all across North America to assist law enforcement in the recognition and reporting of human trafficking, and allowing them to really aid in the recovery of victims and then the arrest of their perpetrators. So with being around for 15 years now, we've been very fortunate to have those great trucking entities and all throughout transportation really be able to uplift us into a position of being able to train the right people, give them those ideas of, hey, what is human trafficking, and allow them to, again, recognize and report what they see. So we've been around for 15 years, and we're very fortunate to have had the ideation of, hey, this is what we want to be down the road, and be able to have trained over 2 million, almost nearly, we were like an inch there, almost 2 million people with this information so that they can really do their part as they're doing their everyday jobs.
What an amazing statistic that y'all already almost reached the 2 million milestone of people that have been trained. 15 years. I remember when I first heard about TAT, and I'm a retired Texas State Trooper, and I went to one of the very earliest trainings that y'all put on in the state of Texas. And as I was listening to the speakers, not only was I impressed with your mission and the passion in which the TAT, both the staff and the volunteers that work with your organization had for this mission, I was struck by how innovative the thought was behind this organization. Coming out of law enforcement and even the general public, we've all heard of Crime Stoppers and we've heard of Neighborhood Watch, and there's always been ways that the law enforcement community has tried to involve the non-law enforcement community in providing tips and keeping eyes open and things. But when I first heard the mission of TAT, I thought, how smart of an idea is that to focus on the trucking industry and train truck drivers what to look for to recognize these various, indicators or evidence of trafficking. And so I from the very start, I've just been in awe of the fact that y'all created this incredibly effective organization and what it is you're doing. But tell us why in the beginning that y'all caught the vision that somehow truck drivers, professional truck drivers, and the trucking industry were going to be at the very heart of the solution of this trafficking problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So with a little background or context, when TAT began or was founded in 2009, there was really that hope that this organization would create genuine and valuable change throughout the transportation industry. So in saying that, the transportation industry or your truck drivers in its entirety has so much to offer in combating human trafficking. Initially, with that inception, the fundamental idea was that with this industry's numbers, their extensive travels, and then really just the nature of their jobs, that they could provide an extra set of eyes and ears for law enforcement. And this is especially true when in the course of, specifically a driver's job, they are often in those places where they could encounter victims of human trafficking. You think about it, and I do believe that the transportation industry as a whole is 3 times the size of your law enforcement population or the people who work through that law enforcement aspect. And so there's so much opportunity for us to not only recognize and report what we see in those areas of truck stops and your nation's highways, but also in those areas where you might be off of the job entirely, or you might be going through, and that's those city streets or those hotels that you stay in or those bus terminals that you might pass through. And even specifically, not even just your professional driver, but I think we can all attest that in some way, shape, or form, all of us do have a huge part in transportation, whether it's taking your kids to school or going to the grocery store to pack up your fridge. I mean, there's a lot of places where this is very relevant. So believe me when I say that there's no place out of scope for someone to witness human trafficking.
When you talk about the fact that truck drivers, not only is the trucking industry larger than the law enforcement population in our nation, but you could take a truck stop or a rest area or a parking lot of a hotel, some of the places where some of these young people might be being trafficked. And if a police car drives through that, obviously whatever's going on is going to shut down. But a truck can pull into one of those locations, and that trafficking activity will just keep right on going on. And so when you've got that trained truck driver sitting behind the wheel of that tractor and he pulls into one of these locations, he can see things that if a police car pulled in would instantly be taken away. And so, I just stand in reverential awe of the model that y'all developed, and I'm so very proud of the way that y'all did that. I want to tell you the four of us on the podcast, the four hosts, and this isn't what we do full time. We actually have day jobs, but one thing we all do, we're involved in training. We teach truck drivers and we teach safety courses all over the U.S. And I tell you that to tell you because I know that one of the biggest initiatives of TAT is your training. So talk to us for a few minutes, and I'm going to invite my co-hosts because they're all gifted instructors and all gifted trainers. And one of our team, Mr. Barry Harrison, still holds the CDL. He's a former driver. But talk to our audience, and you may get some interaction here from our podcast team. What are the training initiatives? What does training look like? What is the goal of TAT when y'all go out and conduct training?
Yeah, so you are so on. Our biggest initiative, and in my opinion for TAT, is to really just put out training. We want people to acknowledge what human trafficking is and the very depths of the definition and its history, as well as having those points of interaction or those points of acknowledgement to really notice those red flags or have in their pockets questions to ask if they find themselves in one of those situations of seeing human trafficking being active. But really, depending on what you do in the industry, we have multiple trainings available. Specifically, training videos is where we kind of hit that point or target. And let me preface by saying everything that we have to offer at TAT is completely free of charge because we really want to make it as easy as possible for people to understand what this is and then do their part and just really looking out for their surroundings. But one of the first training videos specifically that we created was our OTR, or our general training video, and that essentially contains 25 minutes of content. So it goes over those basic definitions of human trafficking, as well as, the scope of this crime, red flags to look out for. But then it also contains a very personal story from a survivor of trafficking to give you that personable experience for you to really understand not that training has to be this, computerized, monotone, step-by-step instruction, but really give you that documentary feel of really letting it stay with you. With that, it allows you to understand this crime at its most basic level, and that's why it's so important. But a couple other things that we've come out with in the past couple of years actually is a local drivers training. So really more specific to those professional drivers who work in and around our communities. So here you would think most often of those final mile delivery personnel or sanitation workers and others. But lastly, another one that is our most recent, which I think like a year or two now, is our movers and in-home delivery personnel. So really thinking about a training specific to those professional drivers and giving them those details for those moving companies and those white glove services types of training. But in essence here, the trainings, you can take one simple training and do it within 30 minutes of your time and really be set up for success and being able to recognize and then report what you see as you're doing your daily job or as you're out and about and just living your life.
Chris, thank you for being on. This is Mike Bohan. You said something a little bit ago that basically is all of us have a part to play. And I know that with the different types of training that you just mentioned, the OTR guys, the local, the movers, in-home delivery type folks, in our world, just speaking for the co-host of this podcast, we're on the road quite a bit too, and I see a value there for this type of training, just for even for people like us that we're not truck drivers, we're not delivering freight or anything like that, but we're on the road quite a bit. So, what are your thoughts on folks that, let's say, maybe they work for a trucking company and maybe they don't, but they're on the road? What would you say to them? What's the value of this training for somebody who's not a truck driver or a professional truck driver or not on the road like they would be, but they look at this and say, I would like to have that skill set to be able to identify the red flags of trafficking? Is that something that would be of value for really anybody?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons where this wasn't mentioned before, but if anybody's been familiar with TAT, we have looked a little different the past 6 months now. And with that, that is that rebrand of we want essentially is to better communicate our identity to all of those who have actively helped us within the last 15 years, but also make sure that we are inclusive to every entity, whether it be every job title or every entity within the industry, I should say, to fight against human trafficking. So, with saying that, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that, yes, being identified as TAT in this inclusivity, we also want it to make it very known that you might be a truck driver and you might not be. And we want to target you as well. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important for us to acknowledge that I think every one of us have some point or some motive within transportation, whether you're not even in the industry in its entirety. And saying that, you make a trip in your car to the local community watering hole, or you go on vacation, or you, like I said, go get groceries to stock up your home. But with saying that, I think it's so important for us to understand that yes, there might be specific points or specific acknowledgments within these training videos that I've listed, but it's also very general to the point of being relatable to somebody who is not a truck driver. You talk about red flags, for instance. Let's say you might see some activity at a grocery store, I think is a good example. And I know that we all spend some time in those from one point to the other, but looking at red flags, I mean, do you see anything peculiar? Do you notice a young woman, or a man or a young boy, and they have no knowledge of their whereabouts, or are they not able to communicate for themselves? Or is there any mention of them talking about making some type of quota, or they have any signs of branding or tattooing? I mean, looking at those points, you don't only have to see that in the basis of a truck stop or one of those places where it might be that congregation of truck drivers. I think it's very easily transferable to, if I see something like that in one of the places you wouldn't think, I guess, is very, makes it very relatable for anybody to really look at these videos and be able to take some knowledge from it and be able to use that in a transferable way as they go about their day to day.
Chris, this is Jim. Mike's comment there got my mind really working, and your explanation there I think is great. Sometimes we go into the movie world, or we think, oh, technology, we got cameras everywhere, there's audio everywhere, and it's simple for those of us that do crash recreations or incident recreation to go back and have footage and pick it apart. But this human element that we're training and that we're calling upon those of us that are out there and working and long hours on the road, in and out of truck stops, convenience stores, things of that nature. I've moved across the United States, and listening to, oh, hey, this interstate section is one of the highest human trafficking. It just gives you pause to be like, how could this little 45-mile stretch be such a big highway, trafficking section of ground? There's no substitute for training people in their eyes. And we're in such a world of people saying, oh, mind your own business. When we see something, say something. This human training, the identifiers that you're talking about, and the curriculum that you're proposing, I think it's back to the root, back to the individuals that are out there that are aware and paying attention, not getting lost in our own world and what we have going on or what's going on around us. It's an awareness of those in our space and those that we encounter, and paying attention to those details. I think you're on, and I really look forward to seeing some of these videos.
Yeah, and you're totally right about that. I mean, I think a lot of times, and this is, information or this collection of ideas is where, we have these conversations with people of, you're right, we're very much in a time period of mind your own business, or, don't pay attention to others, pay attention to yourself. And I think the most root problem, or the most essential point that we can understand is, if you see something that doesn't look right, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, jump right in the middle. What we're really asking people to do is, if something just doesn't sit right and you think it is human trafficking, it's as simple as making a 2-minute phone call to alert the right authorities, whether it be, your local law enforcement, or it be the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's as simple as that, and it's something that can be easily done. So yeah, we definitely can do our part without, putting ourselves at risk, or getting in, the middle of something that would not be very helpful. Doing it the right way.
Chris, this is Barry Harrison, and as a driver, I was looking through some of your website and stuff, and one comment I really wanted to make that just hit home with what the vision was in the beginning, and reading here about Lynn Lindbergh, who is you guys' founder, and just how she knew from, growing up around a motel there in El Paso, Texas, that, truck drivers are just people of immense character. And, that really hits home for me, because something that I always hit on in this podcast, especially, is, it seems like I always go back to this, but being your brothers and sisters keeper is such just a thing that resonates with me, again, especially as a driver. And, for her to have the vision to say, here's an industry that reaches all points of our continent, but B, these are good men and women who want to be their brothers and sisters keeper, and want to have those resources available, because, it goes back to me for, when a driver has an incident or an accident, or if they get pulled into a scale station or something like that, if you don't have prior training to that, right? If we see something that doesn't set right, if you don't know what to do, like you said, make that 2-minute phone call, you just don't know to make it. So if you don't mind, can you elaborate a little bit more? I saw that she had her daughters read a book in the beginning, I think it was, and that kind of spurred the whole TAT movement.
Wonderful story for sure. I mean, it's such not even a miracle, but there's a lot of hope and this excitement for being a part of a really good team, and being able to go after this industry that you are. I'm glad you raised the point, just wonderful, wonderful people. And you have to know, a driver, and you have to really be involved with the community to understand that to the fullest extent. I mean, great people. I have personal stories of myself of random drivers helping me in, side of the road incidents, or whatever it might be, but just great people. And with that vision in tow, you look at Lynn and her 4 daughters wanting to make this change. I said at the beginning, it was really that focal point and that intention to do something very valuable, where, they said, hey, we're going to target transportation to help us in this fight, because we know they're the right industry to help us in this fight, because they will. So it's just one of those great points to look at. I mean, they have done so much, and they are continually doing so much. And you talk about, drivers might see something, but might not necessarily know to make that phone call. And we can say that with the utmost confirmation and respect, that we do have drivers who come forward and say, I took this training and I thought it was helpful. And when I went back out on the job, I noticed some things and I knew what to do in that situation. And they made those calls. So definitely a point to look at. I mean, the industry in itself, I don't think there would have been another one to really help us in this fight like those truck drivers have.
Chris, I know ultimately the goal is to get the training down to the driver level, because they're the men and women looking through the windshield of a truck and seeing these kids being trafficked or these young adults being trafficked at these various locations. But a lot of our listeners of the podcast are either owners of trucking companies or they're the safety directors at trucking companies. Now, if they're listening to your presentation and they're sitting there saying, you know what, I've got 25 drivers, or I got 2,500 drivers, or however many they may have, and they say, how can I get involved? How can I get my company involved? If I want to get my drivers trained, what do I do with my trucking company? How can a motor carrier that may not currently be involved with TAT get involved? What are the steps they need to take as a trucking company so that their drivers eventually get this fantastic training?
Yeah, I mean, and we talk about training, one of the places to start is definitely that's a huge push for people to be involved, but there's a multitude of ways to be involved and help bring this awareness to what human trafficking is and what you can do. So with starting there, you can share the information. You can simply share, I know this great organization, and that could be inviting people to listen in on webinars that we have or podcasts, be involved in that, or even have TAT come out and do an in-person meeting to talk about what human trafficking is and what they can do as a collective. But with that, all of our resources, and I've mentioned it time and again, are completely free of charge. So you're really able to request our free materials as well. And if you go to our website, our training library specifically, it gives you all of the resources that we currently have. And most of them are mail to order. So whether it be wallet cards or decals or the variety of posters that you can hang in warehouses, brick and mortar locations, you can take advantage of that and really start in that position of providing that awareness so that it gets people intrigued, it gets people to ask questions. But you can also sponsor TAT. I mean, one of the items that allows us to be where we are today is because of the partners that we have out there and the ones who really participate and sponsor in a way that allows us to, again, provide the free resources and the free training and allows us that longevity to continue to do that work. But that is essentially, just the tip of the iceberg, as they say, where anything's possible to be involved. We really do have a lot of great partners, and a lot of the time it's them who come up with these phenomenal ideas of how they can spread awareness. I mean, I know some out there today, and you might have even recognized them, but they have trailer wraps of, the National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and others who do employee fundraisers where it's a ugly sweater contest or a chili contest, or even at truck shows, making sure that we're there and we're readily available to help you with any questions that you might have, or give you, those window decals and those wallet cards so that you're able to really participate.
Y'all have always partnered with law enforcement as well. And I mentioned I went to a TAT meeting in the early days of your organization. And the meeting I went to, surprisingly, was for law enforcement. We probably had 150 police officers, everything from local officers, state officers, even there were some federal law enforcement officers that attended that meeting. And part of TAT's purpose there was, hey, if we train these truck drivers and they make a call, y'all need to understand what they're reporting to you, because there are a lot of police officers in our nation. I don't want to say they're naive. They just have never received training specific to human trafficking. Some of them have, if you mention the word trafficking, they either think about narcotics or guns or cash, and they lose sight of the fact that people can be trafficked as well.
Chris, as we're kind of coming to the close of our conversation here, one of the things that we've talked about, the truckers and that industry, things like that, but we also know that you guys have had a big influence on the enforcement industry, the highway patrol, local law enforcement, things like that. And what's your focus there? Because I know there's a lot of law enforcement folks out there that maybe haven't had this type of training, and I think one of the things that that those law enforcement folks need to know is if they do get a phone call from somebody in the trucking industry or somebody who sees something that they think is a red flag issue and they receive a call, they need to know what to do with that information. So what's your focus on that group of individuals, our highway patrols, our local municipality police departments, things like that? Because I know that you guys are still involved with those groups as well, correct?
Correct. And one word for that is it's fundamental. It's fundamentally important for us to really be great partners with your law enforcement agencies, specifically because as they are continuing to fight human trafficking, they also need to understand the nuances of the crime itself, including tactics that traffickers use and the populations that are most vulnerable in these situations. But they really need to be fluent in those human trafficking indicators and actively look for signs of trafficking when they're called out to the scene. And they always need to employ that victim-centered approach. And I think it might have been brought up earlier, but just understanding, a lot of the time, and it's so unfortunate to say, but traffickers, they are smart people and they know how to go about business so that they can make a profit. So not only are they going to be in these obvious places, but they're going to be everywhere else as well. So giving law enforcement those tools of necessity to really understand from that victim-centered approach of, hey, maybe this is not a prostitute. Maybe this is somebody who's genuinely there out of their own will. I mean, a lot of the time it's our nation's kids, our children, and thousands of them who are being forced in these types of situations. So very important to understand that, a lot of the time this is not out of somebody's own accord or their own will, but something that is being done to them. So again, the victim-centered approach of really allowing law enforcement to understand, and then with the investment that we're putting into transportation as a whole, allow those officials and those agencies to multiply their efforts by partnering with these drivers and trucking personnel. I think through public and targeted awareness campaigns, agencies can really mobilize key industries in their states, as well as provinces, to be an extra set of eyes and ears. So they truly get a lot of work done when those two are connected and able to do things together.
So for those agencies out there, whether it's, I know Kenny mentioned earlier, safety directors at trucking companies, but we're specifically talking about law enforcement agencies now. Do they, is there an option there for a train the trainer situation where you guys can come in and you can, train a group of individuals, and then they can, if it's a large enforcement agency, then they can go out and train the rest of their folks in-house, so to speak?
Yes, there are so many opportunities for this as well. And I think one to mention as well is our partnership with the American Trucking Association. They specifically work with us and partner with us for a ambassador opportunity. So it's essentially, it is full-time truck drivers who, I hate to say audition, but they interview for the chance to be a speaker on behalf of TAT, to give their personal experience and story, as well as relaying information about what human trafficking is and how easy it is to recognize and report on the job. Other opportunities is where it be one of our TAT staff members who comes in and speaks in this sort of train the trainer way and gives them all the necessary resources. We do have what's called toolkits or engagement pathways, and it gives them all the pointers to hit, as well as frequently asked questions of what might be asked in your day-to-day of training. But so many opportunities. One was really the ambassador point of view, but also just with anybody. I mean, I think we can agree if you're really wanting to invest the time in acknowledging and understanding what human trafficking is, then you do have the capability of relaying that information to the people it needs to be relayed to.
Really, Chris, I just want to thank you and commend you for what you guys do. I mean, if any of our listeners haven't checked out the website, I encourage you guys to do that. There's a ton of resources on there, and again, as a driver, you know, we're trained to be observant anyway and look for the hazards that we're surrounded by each day. And just the fact that you're the people that set TAP up were forward thinking enough to see that drivers are excellent people of character, and just to offer this next set of training to stop what is a serious problem. It's incredible. And I just wanted to personally thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for being a guest.
Yes, thank you. And we're here because you guys are. So I mean, we owe all of our respects and gratitude to what transportation does in order for us to do our jobs.
Just to thank you again, Chris. This is Jim. My military background, there's something that just gets fired up inside of me when I think of this situation. Just trafficking in general. It makes me sick. It makes me mad. It makes me angry, and it makes me want to do something about it. And this is what normal, everyday people can be a part of, the more awareness and the training that we can have. And so thank you for being a hero, whether you feel like one or not. Your cause is just, it's so important. And thank you for taking up the fight and educating us about this program that is out there. And I look forward to fighting the good fight with TAT going forward.
And we're excited to have you a part of that.
Well, Chris, I will echo what these two gentlemen have said. I truly thank you, not just for coming on the podcast, but for what you guys are doing day in and day out. And Jim just said something there as he were kind of wrapping up here. He said this conversation makes him want to do something. So I'm going to throw this to you, Chris, and say, all right, to our listeners out there, what can they do? Where can they go to find you? And what are maybe some first steps that they can take right now if they say, just like Jim did, this conversation makes me want to do something? What do I do? Where do I go?
A good place to start is our website, which is www.tatnonprofit.org. If you go there, you're going to find a beautiful display, I might add, of information that's going to help you be in action, allow you to really be a part of the cause. So for one, I think it'd be important to look at the work that we do. We work with a variety of industries as well as agencies and have very focused initiatives that people can really be a part of. Another place would be to go to our Take Action tab. I mean, for one, that's going to give you a lot of ways and when and how you can get involved, and then give you that information on how to be a part of this community of trying to combat human trafficking and really recover those victims and arrest their perpetrators.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got the resources there for everybody who's listening, but there's also an opportunity for them to support you guys in what you're doing as well, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So if you're listening out there, this is a great organization to support. If you've listened to this conversation we've had here today with Chris, with TAT, it's something that it's a pretty sobering conversation to have, because it's just too often, it's just too common a thing out there. And I think it takes a lot of us, as Chris said earlier, we all play a part. And so if you're listening to us today, please take a look at their website. Please look to get involved. TAT is an organization that on their website, it says they're there to educate, to equip, to empower, and to mobilize. And I think those phrases to me get me going, just like Jim said they do. It's like, okay, let's get involved and let's impact this and make a change there. So, Chris, we support you and your organization and your efforts, and we certainly thank you for coming on today. You're a wealth of knowledge. You did a great job today, and we appreciate you just taking a little time out of your day to have this very, very important conversation.
Yeah, and I appreciate being here. You know, one thing that we can all agree on is if we just have the basis of what this is, then we can really do our part. So we're appreciative, and we hope that a lot of people come forward and want to know more.
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners out there, we thank you for joining us on this episode of Driving the Line. We always appreciate what you all do out there. You are the best of the best. We highly, highly, highly appreciate your day in and day out activity out there on the road, not just moving freight up and down the road, but to everything else that you're doing to make this nation what it is. So we thank you for what you do. Until next time, stay safe out there on the road, and we will catch you next time right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.